I've got a couple of questions for you, and it'd be good to get people's comments on this as well. But when we talk about kind of potential transfers and getting big money in, the Watkins Duran conundrum will be kind of bubbling all season, because I don't think there's a way of being able to put them both in the side together at this moment. I think I just can't see it working with kind of how we operate in midfield. So there will come a time where a decision has to be made. Now, if it was your choice in terms of the transfers, who would you sell, Watkins or Duran?
That is tough. If you gave me a choice now, as in currently, who am I selling? I can't believe I'm saying it, but I'm selling Watkins, just in terms of Duran's younger. He's long. You can get more in terms of 8 years out of Duran, but you're not going to get 8 years out of Ollie Watkins. If you sold Duran, you're realistically talking 3 to 4 years with Watkins, because he's 28, 29, so he's coming into them twilight years of being 30. But if you sell Watkins, and then if Duran is only 20, you've got nearly 10, 11 years with him. So I in terms of that, I sell Ollie Watkins as much as I wouldn't like to, but like I said, you have to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is Duran's younger and he's scoring goals. So it's got to be Ollie for me.
Yeah, Rachel said I'd sell Watkins personally, but she loves Ollie, similar to you, mate. James said he'd sell Duran. Ratter says no brainer. Buy Ollie.
Buy no brainer. That's Sam's
think about it. Yeah, probably. Adamski says agreed, Martin. So I think the consensus is might get some more comments, but the consensus is Ollie. But yeah, it's one that probably will rear its head, and that's another thing that Tom mentioned in that interview before, that this will probably come up. I don't think it'll come up in January, but it will certainly come up at the end of the season as to what happens with one of those two, because a decision will have to be made, I'm sure. The second little question is relating to, a lot of these players on longer deals, and we've got Maatsen on a long-term deal. We signed him. Obviously, Duran signed a long-term deal. Morgan Rogers has done the same. I'm sure he sees a future with Jacob Ramsey if he can stay fit. It's almost like there's a new guard of Villa players to kind of come through. Maatsen hasn't quite broken in. Onana's learning how to play. He's only 23. But then you've almost got like, I don't want to say old guard, but you've got like Watkins at 28, 29. You've got John McGinn at 30. You've got Tyrone Mings at 31. You've got Matty Cash, who's probably at the limit of his ability now, although we probably miss him at right back at the moment. But when do you think that evolution from some of those players that have got us to where we are now will start to phase out, and these new players, this new breed of player will be the full main men, the full main team?
Well, look, I know in the summer there was this whole profile that we wanted a younger team, more energetic team, and that was coming from Monchi, Emery, and Vitagani. So, in that sense, then when you look at the older players now, they're not exactly old; they're still in their prime, like you said. They're like a Matty Cash and Ollie Watkins, Tyrone Mings, and Diego Carlos. These players now, are starting to get at the point of, when it comes to this summer, are they going to keep them or are they going to sell them? And that's just the reality of it. Maybe not Ollie Watkins, but when you're looking at the players in the 30s, you're looking at the players maybe with big contracts that aren't playing as much. Like That's all going to be taken into account. And then you've got the younger players. And Ian Matson's still only 22, 23. Onana, like you said, he's 23. Tielemans, I think, is even funny enough, he's 28, 29. So it's just a really young team now, and it's refreshing. I actually think it's really refreshing because normally we've had Villa teams that are players that were vastly experienced. We didn't really have that many young players, but now you have young players all over. Another player as well, I think Luca Dina could be one to be looked at, maybe potentially being sold in the summer. I know he's been
he's 31, isn't he?
Excellent
But
and
he's been
everything, but
brilliant.
his
Yeah.
age is really going to be looked at as well because, like I said, like he's 31, 32 coming up. I think he's our highest earner. So you're going to have to look at him and go, you need to get him off the books. His age, that high wage. I sound like George. But then, you've got an Ian Matson who's a bit younger in 22, 23, not as a high wage. So these things are all going to have to be taken into account. So, like, obviously, like you said, January is not probably going to be a massive clear out like people would think it would be. But I think this summer you're really going to see a lot of moves and players that are a little bit older than the rest. And I think maybe the emphasis would be not to have a player over 30, which I really think is hard to do because you want some players around that are over
You
30.
still need some experience,
Yeah,
I
that
do agree.
leadership voice as well.
Yeah.
It's maybe the emphasis is to do that, but at the same time, if you want to see out games, if you want a big voice and character in the dressing room, you need those type of players, But they all come into, like a John McGinn, for example. He's a big voice in the dressing room. He's a leader. So you're going to need those type of players around.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. It probably is the summer where there's a potential for movement, and I think that's regardless of what European competition, if any, we end up in, and obviously it depends. If you get in the Champions League and still have a big clear out and bring number of players in, you could obviously have to make lots of sales if you don't get in the Champions League. It's all. It is set up for a big summer because, as we say, there could be a bit of a crossroads with a number of players. I mean, CC said, I really like Watkins, but I'm also not blind to his weaknesses. No one is unsellable for the right price and time. Nick said, Mings and Buendia, no need for sentiment in terms of, looking to move them on. Kevin said, every time I think Dina is done, he comes back with a tremendous performance, as he showed for France. And if there's anyone for resilience, it's him. It's absolutely him. Stephen said, liked your comment earlier about Watkins being taken off. Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, if players know they're going to be taken off after 60 minutes, I mean, if they haven't scored in the first half, it's almost like, well, what's the point? Because I know I'm going to get taken off. So, yeah, that's a tricky one. Dickie said, question is Dina our most important player? Now he's in the form of his life. And it is. It's why it brings up that question about the kind of the new guard versus the old guard. And, Dina's been fantastic for us. But there is an element of Maatsen giving us a bit of an extra dimension when he comes on, which is a tough one to square that circle. There's when I kind of feel like Dean is great with some deliveries, but we don't get down that left-hand side enough. And especially if Conte's playing on the right, we've got no attacking thrust down down the wings. So it has to then all of a sudden have to come from Morgan Rogers trying to run through midfield. And me and Kev had a big debate over this last week in terms of he's picking up the ball probably 60, 70, 80 yards away from the opposition goal and having to beat four players and then try and pass the ball through to Ollie Watkins with a defence splitting ball. And it's most of the time it's not working. Whereas if we had Ian Maatsen to bomb down that left-hand side, that would give us another attacking option. And if you have sort of a Matty Cash, hopefully back fit on the right-hand side, it gives a bit more support to say a Leon Bailey to maybe take a player away from him. Then all of a sudden you're opening up 2 or 3 different attacking options. Whereas at the moment, we've kind of really only got one. And that's where I think we're suffering at the minute.
Yeah, like Dina has clearly showed great mentality to keep his spot on the team, and that's a huge testament to him. Of course, in the early days when Moreno came in, he was dropped, and he wasn't even getting a look in. Moreno gets injured, he comes into the play, and he keeps him out. And now look, Moreno's gone to Nottingham Forest on loan, and now you've Ian Maatsen, who came in from Borussia Dortmund, who was in the team of the season for the Champions League at left back, mind you. Played when he was in the Champions League there against Bologna, I thought he was excellent, Maatsen. I really did. But at the same time, when you get back to the Premier League that weekend, you couldn't drop Digne. It's just that real headache that Unai Emery has. But it's a great headache to have. You've got two quality players here. One's going to do a job in this game, and one player is going to do a job in this game. So, in that sense, when that question came, is he our most important player? I personally would say no. I think it's Yuri Tielemans at this minute. But if you're looking at probably the most important defender at this minute, I actually probably would say Luca Digne, because compared to the rest of them, I think he's been a lot better than the rest of our defenders this season. So I think he's our most important defender this season, rather than our most important.
No, it's fair. Yeah, it's fair.
So,
absolutely.
Like some could probably still turn around and say Konza, some could still turn around and say Torres. But I just feel like if I'm going off performances this season,
consistent,
and consistency, it's Luca Digne for me as the best defensive player. So
I don't think many people would disagree.
That would be my answer for that. So I just think that it's really hard to keep him out of the team. Now, look, you never know. Maybe come back to international break, we might see 2 or 3 poor games from Digne, and Maatsen comes in, and that's his place cemented. But obviously, you don't want that to happen for any player. But at the same time, though, if it does happen, you wouldn't be missing Digne, I don't think, because you have an Ian Maatsen.
Yeah, 100%.